I want to ask you a question. So you're walking down the street and you see someone running wildly. They've got no shirt on, they're barefoot, their head is turning this way and that way, they're crying out. They seem very disorganized and they're running towards you. Now, what do you think about that person? Many people, when I ask them that question, they say, well, that person seems crazy. And then I say to them, okay, but now you see behind that person coming round the corner, chasing them, a fully grown adult lion. The lion is running towards them. Now what do you think about the person? And most people will say, of course, he's no longer crazy, he's just a person running away from a lion. So also I ask them, when you saw him before, did you want to help him? Did you want to cross the road to avoid him? And they usually say they want to cross the road to avoid him. And yet, when they see the lion coming, if there's anything they thought they could do about it, they usually would try to help him. So the question is, what's different about the man? And the answer actually is nothing. There's nothing different about him at all. He's exactly the same person, doing exactly the same thing. His biology is working exactly the same. And we've decided that he was crazy, and then we've decided that he's not crazy. We decided not to help him, and then we decided to help him. And the only difference is that we could see the lion. So out of this, I began to think, really, what are we talking about when we talk about mental health? I mean, we understand about physical health when we say, like, my stomach hurts, I've got a tummy ache. We understand that there's a mechanism in our body which may be having some trouble. But when we talk about mental health, what are we really talking about? A lot of people will say, well, it's problems with our thinking, or it's problems with our emotions, because these seem like the things in the mind. But really, craziness often is something we look at and we think as being behavior. So it's really what the body is doing. Even speaking right now is something my body is doing. The way I move, the things I say, the voice I use, these are all things my body is doing. And it's very hard to understand why the body is doing what it's doing if we can't see the full picture, the context of what might be or might not be threatening that person or that body. So the idea of the invisible lion, which is my new book, is that we're all running around behaving in perfectly normal ways if only we could see the lions. Now, how are the ways that we behave when we respond to a lion or when we respond to threat? It's really about how we respond to threat. So there's various ways that people respond to threat. One is that they run. We're very familiar with that. And you'll probably have heard the expression fight or flight. So you might fight or you might run away. Another thing that happens is that people freeze. They become immobilized. They're so overwhelmed by the threat. And there are other more subtle things people do. Some people cry for help. Some people might just become a little bit more vigilant because they're aware of a threat somewhere in the environment. And some people actually become super friendly. If you come up to someone and you seem like you may or may not be a threat, I don't know, some people will engage you. That's called social engagement. So there's various different ways of responding to threat. And the question is, can we really understand another person or even ourselves if we're not aware of the threat we're responding to? Now, it seems obvious that the threat that we'd be responding to is in our environment right now. Therefore, why would there be any confusion? And it turns out that through an unfortunate accident of evolution, coupled with the way that our bodies have learned to respond to threat and the way that our bodies have learned to recover from threat, that we don't always find that our bodies, as human beings in 2019, are responding to only the threat in our current environment. We actually spend an awful lot of our time responding to threats that are not here, but that were threats that we've experienced previously, which we haven't finished responding to. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but if you think about the idea of, for example, someone who's had a car crash, and then we say, oh, they've got PTSD because they're kind of stuck in flashbacks, and they wake up every night for months with dreams and cold sweats. And eventually they kind of get it out of their system and they feel better and they go back to driving and everything's fine. We understand that. But where does that mechanism come from? So the answer is it comes from the evolved capacity to become activated in response to a threat And then if the threat becomes overwhelming, to become frozen, because actually that helps people survive better. Well, it helps animals survive better. And then if you survive the threat after freezing, you have to come out of it and discharge all the energy that went into it when you were reacting in a more activated way to the threat. So you might run, and then you might freeze, and then you might have to get up and run away again. And if you do that completely, then your body finishes responding to the threat. If you don't do it completely, then you haven't finished responding to the threat. And all sorts of things can then go wrong. So, for example, you might find yourself overreacting to things in future because you've got material in your basement you haven't yet dealt with. Or you might find yourself underreacting to things in future because you freeze too quickly because you've got material in your basement you haven't yet dealt with. And then this throws everything else off. So you then start having a kind of biochemical storm in your body where you're running when you shouldn't be running, you're freezing when you shouldn't be freezing, and then it goes up the brainstem and into the brain, and your brain, your thinking brain, the thing we think of as our brain, which does all the thinking and talking, starts to say, hey, why am I feeling so threatened, or why am I feeling so shut down? And then reality starts to shift because you start to invent lions where they're not really there. So we're all very good at creating different realities and projecting and coming up with ideas about people, and it's the basis for the whole arena of politics and why we disagree about the same facts. It's because we're all reacting actually to different threats and different histories, and therefore what we think of as a different reality. So there are many consequences. Physical health is one of them, and then this thing we call mental health is another. But at the heart of this is something called the nervous system, because the nervous system is the conduit between the information that comes to the brain and what the body then does. So the nervous system is how we organize our response to threat. And if the nervous system becomes blocked or frozen or impaired, then we have what's called a dysregulated nervous system. And that kind of nervous system leads to all the problems that I think we now call mental health problems. So when you think about having anxiety or depression or many of the common mental health problems, you can start to reframe them and say, well, hold on, am I overreacting to my current environment as if it's more threatening than it should be? Or maybe am I underreacting to my current environment as if it's even more threatening than it should be? And a lot of the things that we describe as mental health problems, emotional problems, relationship problems, are actually quite simple. They can boil down to, I'm lying in bed when I should get up. That seems like I'm overwhelmed by the threat of getting up. Or I'm super anxious when I'm waiting at the bus stop. That's like I'm standing at the bus stop next to a lion. What is really going on? And then you see how hard it is to be friends with people, to have relationships, to get on with family members. Because if everyone's overreacting and underreacting all the time, then it's chaos. So really what I want to try and ask you to think about is to start to reframe this idea around mental health and start to consider the idea that there's something called nervous system health, which is underlying that and therefore helps to explain it. And the reason why I want to explain it is because I don't think mental health is very well explained. So if you go to your doctor and you say, I'm generally very anxious, he'll say, you've got generalized anxiety disorder, which doesn't tell you anything other than what the doctor just told you. Whereas if you come to me and say I'm generally anxious, and I'll say, well, you've got a dysregulated nervous system, which is the result of 100 million years of evolution and some wrinkles in the system, then it begins to get interesting. And then you can actually start to ask the question, well, if we know what causes it, we got some good ideas about how to fix it. So for now, I just want you to think about using the idea of mental health slightly differently. Think about the invisible lions that are in your environment right now. When you feel overwhelmed, see if you can connect through your body back to what it is that's really overwhelming you, and it can be anything from now back to the day you were born or even before. Equally, when you're anxious, I want you to think the same. I want you to start to connect through your body, through your felt sense of anxiety, back to the things that may have caused you the anxiety. Because if you go up to your brain and you just try and solve the problem by thinking and persuading yourself, for example, there's nothing to be afraid of, or persuading yourself you should get out of bed, it doesn't work. It's like putting water into the radiator of a car when you have a flat tire. It just doesn't work. And you know that already. So my passion is really that while the world is so busy creating more awareness around mental health, I want it to actually become more intelligent about mental health. Because if you're just hearing white noise and then you turn it up and it's louder, it's just more white noise. But if we could start to have a conversation where the white noise gives way to sense, gives way to explanation, and gives way to logic and reason and clarity, then that's something I would definitely get on board with people talking about more. I hope this was helpful. Come back and see some more blogs on my website, theinvisiblelion.com, and if it really interests you, have a look at the book, which is available on Amazon, and there'll be more videos to come. Thank you. Bye.